When was it founded? It was founded on November 1st, 1993. What was the reason it was founded? The European Union was created in order to end violence and wars between neighboring countries as seen in World War II. The main community that helped establish a lasting peace was the European Coal and Steel Community, as they both economically as well as politically united European countries. So what problem is it trying to solve? A lot of what the EU does is about bringing people in Europe closer together. It tries to make it easy for Europeans to buy and sell things to each other. This is done by changing the rules that control trade. It is also getting rid of controls that stop people from EU countries moving around freely inside the Union. One of the EU's main goals is to promote human rights both internally and around the world. Human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. These are the core values of the EU. So the structure. Who are its members? There's officially 28 countries such as France, Finland, Belgium, Austria, Denmark, Ireland, Italy, and more. How do they join? Any country that satisfies the condition for membership can apply. These conditions are known as the Copenhagen criteria and include a free market economy, a stable democracy, and the rule of law, and the acceptance of all EU legislation, including of the euro. Why would a member want to join? It can stabilize the economy of a country. For example, look at Greece, where other countries can bail them out, such as Germany, and made even easier by a mutual currency. The free movement between EU member states is a massive benefit, as the country can gain foreign workers to increase its workforce, along with an increase in tourism to boost the economy, as the countries don't generally require visa access for short visits. Another reason countries may wish to join the EU is that commodity prices are significantly lowered. This is possible because the EU creates a single market for all members, meaning certain taxes are eliminated. So how do they make decisions? They make decisions as egalitarians because all countries have a word to say and have the chance to forge and make an opinion if needed. The European Union is taking in consideration all of the countries' beliefs as equal.
Power. How does it aim to resolve the problem that it is trying to tackle? The EU creates laws and legislations based on the member states' agreements and treaties that were previously agreed upon. For example, the EU has many environmental policies to tackle the issue of climate change throughout the world and in particular in Europe. So the way these laws are made is the EU follows an ordinary legislative procedure in which the European Parliament, which consists of 750 members, elected members, and the EU Council, which consists of the heads of states from member states and the president of commission, have to both these, the European Parliament and the EU Council must approve the EU legislation. To enforce these laws, the European Union has the EU Court. If there's a situation in which a member state breached or violated one of these laws, the EU can take that member state to the EU Court. In the EU Court, the consequence for the violation will be decided upon. For example, the EU often imposes financial penalties on a member state that has breached one of the laws. Successes and failures. The EU has had quite a few successes, but also a few failures. One of the successes that the EU has had is the EU has managed to create one of the largest single markets in the world, thus boosting European economic power as a whole. Another main success of the EU is the EU has managed to achieve its original goal, which was to make Europe a peaceful continent, rather than one that causes wars, such as World War I, World War II. For example, Germany and France played big roles in these wars. It won a Nobel Peace Prize for doing so. A direct quote from the Nobel Peace Prize website states that in terms of the European Union, for over 6 decades contributed to the advancement of peace and reconciliation, democracy, and human rights in Europe. A third major success of the EU is that the EU is very environmentally conscious. It has one of the highest environmental standards in the world. They have many policies to improve the environmental state and climate change as a whole. This is important as climate change is a major issue in our world today. On the other hand, the EU has had quite a few failures as well. A current failure that the EU is facing is that the EU failed to prevent Brexit, which is the exit of Britain from the EU. This will result in a lot of changes to the economic state of the European Union and the political state. Another failure of the European Union is that there has been an increase in unemployment rates from 2011. It is currently declining by 7.6% across the EU as a whole, but looking at specific countries, there are higher unemployment rates in said countries. For example, Greece has currently an unemployment rate of 21%, which is quite high. A third major failure of the EU is that the EU is not a democracy. Referenda in France, the Netherlands, and Ireland had outcomes of no votes, but in terms of the treaties that were voted upon, these treaties were still implemented anyway. This anti-democracy goes against one of the main goals of the EU as a whole, so this is why this is considered a major failure. Role of individual state power. Individual state power has influenced the EU's successes and failures. For example, when Britain chose to leave the EU, they exercised their individual state power. However, looking at the EU overall, in general, the powers of the EU Council and the EU Parliament overrule the powers of individual states. For example, referring to one of the failures of the EU that states that the EU is anti-democratic, in that situation, the states are not exercising their individual state power. The EU Council and the EU Parliament have more power than individual states because they can take the member states to the EU court and impose sanctions or penalties on them, which is exercising their collective power over the individual state's power. Of course, there is still individual state power in terms of being able to stay or leave the EU, but in general, individual states do not have the most power in the EU. Additionally, within the EU, some states may have more power than others. For example, Germany and France have a lot of power within the EU.
Connecting to the IR theories. Successes provide evidence for liberalism as a whole. This is because liberalism focuses more on equality and on interdependence, which is exactly what the European Union focuses on in order to boost Europe's economy as a whole and to make the continent peaceful. The fact that it's also environmentally conscious and supports human rights and democracy are key factors that liberalism contains, and hence showing evidence of how the EU represents liberalism. The failures also show the same, because if Brexit occurs, then the totality of Europe will also be impacted, showing the strong interdependence between countries and how a single country affects many others. The unemployment rate also affects Europe as a whole, and all of the people are affected. This shows liberalism because all of Europe has been experiencing it, once more because of interdependence between countries.